Oh, Jack, what are we here to do today?
So we're here producing another episode of Frame to Table, our podcast in which we discuss Dungeons and Dragons through the medium of films. It's something that I hope most people have seen.
Now, our previous episode was about the first Star Wars movie, which was a little bit out of date. It wasn't particularly culturally relevant, so we chose a much better film, one that people are all over the world are talking about. What was that film, Jack?
Oh yeah, hot button issue, Robin Hood. Not that one. Not that one. Yes. No, actually.
The
Yes, the
1973.
1973.
Yes, the 1973 Robin Hood. Iconic in its way. I think it's where the furry culture comes from.
I can't imagine a furry existing before 1973, so,
Yeah, it's a perfectly acceptable film that runs very interestingly if you treat it all as a game of D&D, because most of it is a cautionary tale. There's lots and lots of things which you shouldn't do for Dungeons and Dragons. So as a film, it's completely fine, but Jack and I are analysing it like a tabletop game, and we're going to be giving whoever's running this quite a hard and severe bollocking.
Do we have to beep that out? Does American YouTube know what that means?
I think it's so much worse if it's bleeped out. But anyhow, we'll try and maintain even balance. I have much better ideas than you on the whole, but we shouldn't have too many of my good ideas in a row. The audience needs some of your bad ideas so they can kind of tune out and tune back in. I guess we should maybe have overall impressions of the film. It was fun. There was a fox, and he was Robin Hood, and he was voice acted quite well. And there was a bear, and he was Little John, and he was voice acted quite well. And there was some musical scene, which didn't detract too severely from the thing on the whole. And I thought some of the animation was even rather delightful.
It's a very cute little film, and of course it's a tale of Robin Hood. I hope most people would understand that, but the gist of it is this band of rogues who steal from the rich so that they can give back to the poor, because of course the rich are overly taxing the poor, trying to abuse them and take advantage of them, and Robin Hood is not having any of this. So it's a very fun little story if you wanted to play it in D&D.
From a D&D actionable point of view, what was the very first thing we want to talk about?
So the first thing that kind of strikes us when it comes to any film is how you introduce the characters and how you show the audience what they can do. And this tracks over into D&D really, really well, because you want to start your campaign somewhere along the line with some scene, some event, some set piece where the players can express what their characters can do. So Dungeons and Dragons, Robin Hood starts off with a lovely little scene where Robin and Little John dress up as traveling gypsies. They're going to tell Prince John his future by looking in the crystal ball. So they pull his caravan aside and they wave him down and they promise him, "Oh, yes, no, you are. I see a vision of you becoming the true King of England." And as all this is going down, of course, they rob him completely blind. And that's just, I love seeing that kind of thing transferred into D&D, because it's a little introduction where your characters get to say, well, what do I want to do? I want to rob rich people. First scene in the game, you're robbing rich people. And Robin Hood and Little John are fundamentally rogues. I know archery is their big combat skill, but it's shown in the movie mostly that the big thing they love to do is dress up and pretend to be other people. So if you take that as their main character conceit, their main, the fun thing that the player wants to do with this character is they want to be have all the disguised self and the alternate egos and that kind of stuff. So getting to have a really strong opening where the characters get to flex at what they're really good at is just a lot of fun.
I think as well, it's an important lesson. The GM of the game, that is 1973's Robin Hood, is definitely leaning into what his players want to do in quite a clever way. It has happened in games I've been a player in, whereas the core fantasy of my fellow players, some of them, is that they want to be rogues who steal things. And if the DM doesn't give them evil collections of wealth that they can steal for good, then they are going to start playing that fantasy anywhere that they can. And so I think a lot of there's someone in my party who is stealing from me, or there's a rogue who's stealing from charities and making everyone kind of unhappy with how evil they are. A lot of that kind of thing can be circumvented quite neatly. Just like if someone says, "I'm a rogue, I want to be a big thief," give them evil things to steal. It's pretty easy just to create little strongholds or little traveling caravans where heists can be performed, where the rogues practicing the thing that built their character to do isn't going to derail your campaign. I recall the example I have for this is in our first proper game that I ran with you and John and Kaelin. John played Pierre, and Pierre was very interested in the Fae. And if I hadn't sprinkled the Fae into the campaign in any way, quite likely, I think, that John would have tried to force the issue. He did write a couple of letters to academics at the beginning and was threatening to drag everyone to the other side of the continent to the Fey College. But that wasn't quite necessary. I put in a bunch of little Fey strongholds, so like minor Fey nobles doing some evil things. So Kaelin's paladin wanted to stop them, and your fighter wanted to acquire the vast amount of resources and riches that they had. So it was very easy for that thing John wanted to do and wanted his character to be a central part of the experience. And that's just an important lesson. Look at what your players, look at the core thing they want to do, and make sure you deliver on it at least occasionally.
Yeah, it's sort of throwing your players a bone, I guess, in a way, but also if your players have a thing they want to do, that's a huge creative burden taken off you. You don't have to worry about, oh God, what would be fun? What would the players want to do? And the players all rock up with the 3 level 5 mastermind rogues. It's like they want political intrigue. Okay, there's no point in you setting up a dragon fight. There's no point in you worrying about a dragon fight or a lich fight or anything like that in the time being. It's your players have made it quite clear how they want to interact with the world and what they want to do. So that's just effort off your plate.
And I think I would caution against doing this too much. You don't want the world to just be a bunch of character hooks and backstory elements being fed to the player. It does want to have some structural integrity and like a life outside of the players. But when you're creating, the blank page is often intimidating. And if you choose to build off of the things your players are already interested in, so much the better.
Exactly.
Secondarily, there's a thing that I like a little bit that the film does, where Robin Hood is very, very good at the things that he does, but the guards and the forces he's up against are also portrayed as quite threatening. And Robin Hood and his men aren't afraid to outmaneuver them or to run away. And I think that's kind of important. D&D is a combat-based game, and it can be very easy for DMs to treat every conflict that gets in any way physical as a chance to roll initiative. Whereas there are rules in the DMG for chases, there's rules in the DMG for other ways that your players can engage with things. Using skill checks is a very valuable tool in the DM's toolkit, and I like to see that the DM is doing that a lot. It's a little bit weird for Robin Hood to be afraid of guards at all if he could just effortlessly murder them, but the fact that they are clearly a menace that he has to maneuver around adds a lot of weight to the story. He's not any less threatening for it. Like, Robin Hood isn't any less impressive. He's still spectacular, but there are agents in the world who need to be maneuvered around and can't just be taken in a one-on-one fight. And sprinkling those kind of things in can definitely help make your world feel like a stable and solid place outside of the players.
Exactly, and setting up your encounters as something where you understand that the players can get away without actually killing the bad guys can help you to reward your players for that. And so not all characters are built to do combat, or, well, all characters are a little bit in D&D. It's just the conceit of the game. But if your players want to engage in things in a non-combat manner, it's important to reward that, like, in story and in narrative, but also, like, with XP. So if you're prepared from the outset of saying, well, these guards are, like, really high level, so if they kill the guards, that's worth a lot of XP. But honestly, getting away from them is tricky enough, so that's going to be some XP as well. The DMG doesn't do a great job of making it clear that any way you deal with a situation successfully is a success worth experience.
I mean, who knows what that book... It's been a while since I've read it. It's more like a collection of pages that I refer to occasionally whenever I forget how the chase rules work. I don't want to damn... I don't want to damn Crawford. I mean, maybe we can damn Merles, but let's not get into that currently. Oh gosh, it's been 10 minutes, Jack. We've only consulted 2 things. We gotta speed through this. These listeners are probably bored to tears.
So the next thing we wanted to move on to was, there's a lovely little scene. So we begin Robin and Little John and his gang rob the Prince blind. So the prince is quite upset with this, Prince John. So what he tries to do is he tries to lure Robin out of hiding with an archery competition. And this is just a really cute moment in the movie. Everyone enjoys it. Robin shows up in his trademark disguise. Little John, with the disguise so good, he's literally sitting beside the actual prince, and the prince doesn't know anything. Another great opportunity for the characters to flex what they're good at. But specifically, the thing we thought interesting about this is it's not terribly supported in the game rules as written. Because rules as written, if you didn't spend a particularly long time thinking about it, you could say, Robin shows up. Oh, he makes some disguise checks, and that's all good. And then we get to the archery competition, and in the movie Robin trounces everyone around him because he is by definition the best archer in Nottingham. But in the game on the day, it's completely possible for the player to just roll ones and twos and threes and mess up that competition entirely, ruin it, out himself, doesn't get the kiss from Maid Marian, the whole reason that the character showed up in the first place for this wonderful little backstory moment, gone, whisked away. And that can be fun, it can be tense, but it's difficult to work with sometimes. But Connor, you had a really interesting thing that came up in your games to sort of offset this.
That same John is the one that it's his characters that I refer to constantly for some reason. But that same bard, he became a Fey warlock as well as a bard, and he was invited to perform at this theatre, which was a test of his abilities to perform a very difficult piece of music and see if he was good enough to perform for high society, and B, the theatre was quite Fey in and of itself. So it was kind of a test to see if he was ready to engage with that other side of things. John's character was taking this very seriously. Pierre was very invested in performing well. John spent, I think in real life, it was about 3 weeks. We had a total 3 sessions of downtime, which was about 3 weeks in the city as well, where John spent every day not advancing any agendas, not what you guys are doing, of any training or trying to acquire a little bit of wealth. John just spent every day held up in his room practicing, making practice checks, and actually using enhanced ability on himself to make himself better at the practice checks. All of this practice performing, what it did was it changed the outcomes of the dice rolls for when he was on stage. He could still do relatively poorly and relatively well, but all the practice time he put in, there was success thresholds for the practice and failure thresholds, and as he succeeded, he changed what would happen if he were to do badly. So by the time he actually got up on the stage, he didn't roll above a 10 across 6 different performance checks. And that was okay, because what failure meant in this scenario was scraping by and being barely considered good enough. And what success would have meant was, untold riches and wonderful Fey Delight, although Fey Delight can be quite dangerous, of course. So why John was interested in the outcome of the dice rolls wasn't, my character might be revealed to be a stupid idiot, or I might do really well. It was, I might scrape by, or there could be a fantastic reward. And I think that framing could be quite desirable. If you have a character like Robin Hood who wants to do the archery competition thing, allow them to spend some time making some practice rolls, making some preparation to change the outcome of what their actual performance roll on the day is going to be. And if that practice goes really poorly and they're not good at it, they might realize themselves, okay, this isn't going to happen, this is too risky. But if the practice does go really well and they become very, very good at the thing they're trying to do, say that a 2, 3, or 4 is still getting second or third place, perhaps, not completely embarrassing themselves. It's one thing in combat to have a 1 be a total failure. Combat, everything's going crazy, there's huge amounts of adrenaline. It's sort of a different thing when your player wants to do the thing that their character is concepted around, and there's a huge chance of failure no matter what they do. I'd say it's a small thing, it's a niche case, but ameliorating that is always worth doing.
Exactly. It helps the players feel more confident about their abilities and it allows them to size up the situation a little bit better because, risk is fun. It allows for tension in games and it lets people sort of not get away with everything. But when the risk is, my character might just be stupid today, that's no fun, So it's nice to have ways to offset this. So averaging out the results over multiple sets of die rolls rather than having Robin show up on the day and make an attack roll against a stationary object and still somehow miss.
There's just totally unrelatedly, in that same scene, there's an interesting bit where it's mostly played for laughs, but it is quite enjoyable. Maid Marian's lady-in-waiting, Lady Cluck, I think, there we go.
Yes,
Lady Cluck.
You were very close.
When Maid Marian and her are trying to escape with Robin Hood, she engages violently with the guards and is shown to be quite competent. Not crazy good, not wildly good, just competent. She can do that thing, and it's a nice surprise. And I think this is something that MMs could do all the time. We mentioned it in our last episode, is make sure that when the players are helping people, and the people aren't entirely toothless. In the most recent session that I ran for you guys, there was a dragon attacking a city. And because the dragon was much higher CR than you, I had elements of the city try and defend itself from the dragons with you. So archers would stand on rooftops and fire bows and arrows. Clerics would come out and attempt to cast Guiding Bolt. And the dragon dealt with them all quite easily, but it wasted his legendary actions, and it gave you guys a sense that you weren't just defending a papier-mâché fort that no one lived in. And it wasn't a total village full of weenies and people who were going to roll over and die. There was people, even if they weren't quite up for it, even if they weren't quite up to the task, they were willing to try and defend their home, and I think it made it all seem a bit more real and a bit more worth defending. It's also much more heroic to be assisting people who are a little bit able to take care of themselves. If it was an easy task, they could have done it themselves. But I just quite like it, and I always like seeing it in films.
Exactly, and it's very inspiring, I suppose. It shows a lot of hope in the world Robin's trying to protect, that the people of Nottingham they're not just going to lie down and take it, they would rise up if they were able to. And so Lady Cluck takes this one opportunity she has to rebel in this instance, where most of the time she couldn't, because she and Maid Marian are in the Stronghold Tower alongside many of Prince John's guards. So this one little bit of chaos, she finds her moment, and that's just really cool. It adds a lot of meat, I suppose, to a society, to any culture, to say that there are people here who like it, and if the people there like it, then maybe it's worth fighting for.
The entire movie is just 3 anecdotes. It's the first one where Prince John gets robbed, it's the second one where the archery competition fails to capture Robin Hood, and it's the third one where Prince John is so angry that Robin Hood has humiliated him that he just puts every person in Nottingham in jail except for 2 mice, and is then about to murder them by hanging, forcing Robin to come out again and try and engage the situation. Was there anything there that you found communicable? And in case it's not obvious for the audience, we're skipping over all the bad things because we're about to crucify this film. The game master who's done this has not done a particularly good job. But we're starting off, we had a whole metaphor. It's one of those open top sandwiches, you know? You're supposed to do things in a compliment sandwich. But we're not doing good, bad, good. We're just doing good and then bad.
There's not enough good for 2 sides.
I feel like this is like 4 or 5 things. But anyway, go on. Jump into your last thing you enjoyed.
So my favorite thing about that in general is it's a nice ramping up of the stakes. It hooks the characters into it. I don't think it's necessarily necessary. The characters started off here saying, look, we're here for the people of Nottingham. So when the people of Nottingham are in danger, that's a call to action. That's the DM speaking to the players and saying, look, this is the next mission if you're up for it. So I think that's kind of cool. It's always nice to have, you don't want encounters that just sort of show up and the players can just walk away from. Because escaping from an encounter feels fun, but just walking away and not engaging one is sort of was a waste of your time, maybe a waste of the players' times. It can be difficult to engage them in everything. So this was a nice, simple, you're here for the people of Nottingham, aren't you? Well, they need your help.
We haven't talked about Sir Hiss at all, the snake who is with Prince John. And this is the last thing that I think DMs could really get out of this. This is quite good advice. It's very easy for our villains to seem unapproachable, or for our players to not find out much about our villains. And we tend to make our villains cool and interesting. And sometimes difficult for players to get much of time to chat with them, because our interactions with our villains tend to be quite violent. So what this movie did is it gives Prince John, he's not up alone in this tower, he's got this other person that he's constantly talking to. He's got people that he has relationships with, and I think that's just something that every DM could do. It fleshes out the villain quite a lot. When players get to see the other people the villains are interacting with, they can talk to them, and the villain's parents, or the villain's like local community, the villain's loved ones, the villain's employees, all these people who have relationships with the villain and can give the players different sides of him. It's a good idea to have there be other people in the world who have opinions on the villain. So that your players can get a little bit more of a sense of what they're really like, because they're not going to have too much time for a huge chat in the 2 or 3 encounters they have before they kill him.
Yeah, exactly. It also allows you to apply many faces to your villain, because of course when your villain is interacting with your heroes, they're going to want to be as menacing as possible, as evil as possible. They're going to want to be putting on a strong face for your players. But it's those kind of moments of weakness when they're on their own is where you really can get at some of the meat of their backstory. Because you don't necessarily want your villain to spend 10 minutes monologuing at the start of the final fight so that the players have some context for what's happening. It's much more smooth if you have the villain explaining their plans to their underlings, maybe. It comes across as a lot more organic, rather than the villain just taking time out. Talking's a free action, to go on this whole tirade.
And in reality, even regular people often have very conflicting views on political situations. Even controversial figures like Hitler and Stalin had a lot of support, even locally, even at the smallest level. People just tend to get notions about how things should be done and decide that they like people, and then kind of construct justifications for why those people are good after the fact. So it can be good to just introduce your players to different worlds of thought. Maybe just the nice farmer couple who actually thinks that, yeah, the big bad guy, he probably should be in charge. They one big empire, that'd make them proud to be from where they're from. It's a thing that's not too difficult to do, and I think it goes a long way. And I think now we're out of good things.
Yeah, I think the good things have been collected. Stay nice here. The useful things at the front of the video.
Saving the worst for last. What is how are we going to get into this?
So I guess back in chronological order, this is a small little tidbit. But I know I praised the introduction scene where Robin and Little John are shown to be really good at robbing people. But the director, the DM, places Robin Hood in the carriage alone with Prince John for minutes, and nobody interacts with him. He's left him alone. He has the opportunity to rob him blind. And this all makes sense in the course of the movie because Robin Hood's no murderer, he's just here to steal from the rich and give to the poor. But in Dungeons and Dragons, most of the tools your players are given to impact the world are combat tools. They're given weapons and damage dice and armor and AC and all that stuff. So they're primed to want to deal with problems in the combat-y solution because it's usually they have more confidence in, well, I've got a +8 to any attack roll I make and only a +3 to any persuasion check. So that's the kind of thing to keep in mind. You don't, because what's your way out there as a DM? Robin just decides in one moment, wait, Prince John's a bad guy. I'm going to just kill him. And then, oh, actually, Prince John had a stopwatch that stopped time, and it's very difficult to get out of that scenario. Or maybe it was a hologram the whole time.
That's another thing, actually, that the DM of this movie does a little bit poorly, or quite terribly poorly, which is it's difficult to ever feel threatened by Little John. As a big villain, he totally fails to be a force of evil that is spooky. You really don't want your players to feel like they are forced to go up against a wet paper towel. A wet paper towel makes a poor recurring villain. Prince John is constantly shown to be pathetic and prideful and petty and untalented. He schemes a lot, but he's not particularly good at it. He is very bad at reading people. He always falls for the disguises. He's not a great villain, and he's fine for the comedy kids movie that is. But your players deserve someone. They can be flawed. They don't always have to make the right decisions. They don't have to be a tactical genius, but they should have an air of menace and evil and villainy about them. You really don't want your players to be going up against just a comedic schlub who can't do anything right.
Exactly. Prince John never has the upper hand in the entire movie, not for a moment, which is just unfortunate from setting up any tension in the plot.
Our friend John, in the campaign that we are both in Ravnica, recently did a version of this, but it was quite different. I think the difference we're talking about, where we had a small side plot to go into a for-profit private prison and rescue a particular person. And we went in, made some trouble, and the prison owners confronted us with their entourage. And with some successful illusion magic and a little bit of pressure from his friends, my illusion wizard Mint managed to convince his entourage to turn on him. When they did that, we found out that those people were just essentially civilians. They talked a big game and they were very evil. They were doing evil things, but the power all came from wealth and influence. And so when their underlings took a swing at them, it was like a one-hit kill. And they both went down very easy and they were quite pathetic. But that didn't rub us the wrong way at all because A, those were minor villains who showed up for just 2 sessions. So it wasn't as if the entire campaign has been bending towards a letdown. It was actually quite nice in that scenario. As like a spice to add, it's perfectly fine as a tool in your DM's cookbook. But like as the main ingredient, just does make the entire thing seem kind of farcical.
Exactly.
So the DM here is doing something that he's following good advice, but the execution's a bit unfortunate. He's making sure that his players' actions have consequences. It's definitely a thing young DMs can sometimes fail to do. The players go in and they rob the museum blind, or they go in and they kill an evil crime lord, and they expect that the world will change because of their actions, and the DM is not prepared for it to. So no, the newspapers aren't talking about that, and no one really cares about that. Or someone else just stood up and filled his place. And that may be realistic to our world in some capacities, but at the same time, you want to make sure that your players feel when they engage with your world that they're having an impact on it. If not, then they're not really playing D&D. It's some kind of weird theme park-esque contraption. So every act in the story is directly consequential. Little John and Robin decide to rob Prince John, and they do. And Prince John gets very angry with them and decides that he wants to personally destroy Robin Hood. That's a good consequence. It means that whatever Prince John does now, it's done as a direct action, as a direct consequence of what the players have done. It's the players have brought it on themselves. It's really their story. It's not just a villain coming after them for no reason. It's a villain who has made the decision to do so because they've made the decision. And that's good. That's perfect. But the second consequence, where Robin humiliates John in public, turns the public against him, and so John has all of the people just thrown in jail. Like everyone Robin Hood has ever known is thrown in jail, and he's going to start executing them. That's I mean, it makes a compelling showdown for a movie. So I'm not saying the script writers shouldn't have done it, but a DM shouldn't do that at all. It's definitely fine for John to, as a result of that, start applying pressure to Robin's loved ones. But for Robin to just show up in town one day and find out that everyone he loved is in jail awaiting execution because of the consequences of his actions, that's kind of a huge overreaction and slap in the face for your players. So yes, the DM is doing a good thing, making sure that their actions have consequences, but you got to make sure that the player isn't just completely destroyed by actions that they really couldn't have seen coming, because there's no other way for the players to engage with that situation. It does feel like the DM is trying to punish them just for playing the game, which I find quite unsportsmanlike. So definitely give your players consequences. The consequences can be severe, but they shouldn't be so severe so fast as to take people out of the action.
So the thing actually that bugs me the most about that is so you have characters set up with essential premise. We are going to rob from the rich and give to the poor. And then one day, the DM takes away the poor. There's no poor left in Nottingham to give money to, which is a bit of it's a railroad of a scenario. The DM has given this sort of ultimatum of, you can no longer play your characters as you would like to unless you solve this mission. And that can be kind of satisfying in some regards. You can imagine situations where, yes, taking the players out of their comfort zone, saying they can't really keep doing the same thing over and over again. You're going to have to try something different this time. Maybe you're just going to have to rob the rich and save the poor.
Rob the poor and give them back to the poor.
But it's a bit all or nothing in this scenario.
So in the interest of time, what is your final battle complaint? And make it snappy, snapper.
All through the movie, we have been faced with the idea that Prince John himself is a little pathetic and a bit stupid, but his guard and entourage aren't. Robin never engages them in combat where he can get away with it. All the time he's trying to sneak past them and outsmart them. So then when we come to the final battle of the movie, when the entire town of Nottingham are in prison, Prince John sets up 3 guards, 3 of his most ignorant, stupid, unskilled guards. And that's just one that took me out of the movie, let alone like the game. If my DM was like, after this entire time of interacting with level 15 or level 18 city guards, only to find out that the big bad was hiding behind the 2 random vultures and the Sheriff of Nottingham, who up until this point, Robin has already beaten the Sheriff at archery. Like, he's got nothing left.
Mm-mm. And it would be fine, actually. It would be totally fine and acceptable if the players had done something to divert the guards, if they created a fake threat or anything like that. But it does just kind of seem like really convenient. And obviously, in the heat of the moment, your players aren't going to notice a huge amount of convenience. You can actually be quite nice to them as long as you're mean to them in other ways, and the players will still buy it. But there is a line that you can cross, and definitely the Prince of the Realm being guarded by 3 men is that line.
And the thing that got to me most about it is it's showing very little faith in your players. Your players want to be challenged. They want to have an excuse to say, oh, well, this is the big final fight. I'm going to use all my spells, all my spell slots, all my abilities, all my effects. I want to have this big blowout battle. That's fun. They like that. But not trusting them to be able to take on big challenges by just facing them off against 3 stupid dudes. It's not as fun. IMO.
Yes, the real reason that this would fail as a D&D game is the big cardinal sin that a lot of GMs should try to avoid. The term railroading is a little confusing and mixed now. Like, what it exactly means to people is a bit up for debate. But there's a very clear example here of the DM setting some rules that don't exactly make sense and aren't exactly sporting. So the reason Prince John is on the throne isn't because sometimes evil people are on the throne. That's not a thing that can actually happen in the universe of Robin Hood. Not for any reason, just the guy who is the DM believes in feudalism. He believes that this is how the world should work. There isn't any magical things enforcing it. He just doesn't think that not having kings is an option. What happens was there was a good King Richard, who was a wonderful king, and everyone was so much happier being his subject than they would have been free. And then he's connived to go on a stupid crusade by a hypnotist, and that's why the evil king, Prince John, is allowed to pretend to be a king and cause all this trouble. And at no point is killing Prince John actually an option, because Prince John is the ultimate authority, and he's been imbued with that authority by the correct king. So actually everything he does is kind of legitimate. And Robin Hood disagrees with the specifics of things and tries to steal from the rich and give back to the poor, so people can endure the suffering until the king comes back, but there isn't any reason really given why they have to endure that suffering in the first place. Why they can't just deal with John directly. Why they must wait for their god king Richard to come back from his crusade and sort it all out for them. And that's the thing that really bugs me, is that the players have no real agency. They're just surviving this moron, John's idiocy. And Prince John he's not even a very good evil ruler, because he would have destroyed the entirety of the village of Nottingham. Like, everyone was just starving to death in jail. That's not a great way to have a kingdom. He's not going to have a lot of wealth. You can't extract resources from the people who are working on your land if they're all dead because you killed them all on purpose because you're a moron. No one even considers dealing with John directly. The DM doesn't really, that's not on the table. The DM believes that kings are right, or at least for the purpose of the story, that's how it's going to go. And so we have to wait for good King Richard to come back and sort it out. And that means that the big thing that solves the conflict is something that was completely outside of the player's control all the way along. And I think that's definitely poor play. Like, you really shouldn't have your players rally against something and then you say, oh no, actually, you can't change that. That's a big cornerstone of the world, but don't worry. It gets fixed anyway my way. I'm going to Deus Ex Machina, the king comes back and everything is fine, and all of your actions were actually kind of useless. I don't know. That whole thing, it makes the film worse, and it would definitely make any game we played in insufferable.
Exactly, because I can imagine if you set up the premise of Prince John is temporarily on the throne until the real King Richard returns, the first thing your players are going to want to do is, oh, well, how do we get Richard back? And if the DM just says, you don't, he'll show up eventually, what impetus do they have to engage with the situation then? Robin Hood would have been, in the long run, exactly as effective just waiting it out in Nottingham Forest. Just chilling until Richard showed up.
Yeah, perhaps more effective. Like, the people were starving, but Prince John wasn't motivated to murder them. He wasn't deliberately hanging them until Robin Hood engaged. I don't want anyone to get the wrong sense of it here. Sometimes hopelessness is a good feeling to put in your players once in a while, so it contrasts with the agency. Sometimes failure is good, but the idea here that success was never an option from the outset. That when your players engaged with the world, the ending that was going to happen had already happened because you had written it in and they can't interact with it. That's not something you should do at all. Luckily enough, it's not really something that any of the D&D adventures, I think, really fall into. They're usually quite good at letting the DMs know there's multiple different outcomes that can happen here, and it's all dependent on how well your players do. I think it's players who who don't go from a book. They don't use a pre-made adventure. They try to create their own one off the bat. They can often, especially if they're writers or have any other kind of creative inclinations, they often have an end goal in mind, and steering your players towards an end situation is fine, but towards a specific end where it's like, oh, look, the monarchy was great after all. There was a bit of a blip, but King Richard's return shows that it's a really good and awesome thing, and he comes back and fixes everything. Don't do that. Don't do it. Create a world where your players' choices and decisions matter, because that's the big thing we do in D&D. One of the big appeals. A lot of us live in a world where our decisions and choices don't really affect that many people beyond us, and D&D offers a great escape from this horrific alienation and impotence. So don't inflict it on your players when you're playing a game just so that you can have the perfect ending that you wanted to write in. Don't do that. Don't do it. I see you trying.
Well, that's the holy all of it.
Yeah, it's definitely possible that some people are just like, gosh, this guy really hates the monarchy. And while that is true, it's definitely not the point I was trying to get across.
Let your players kill the king. See what happens.
Yeah, let your players be the king. Show the players how complicated it is being king. Actually, I'm kind of astonished that there isn't a D&D campaign that's just, yeah, you guys are like the 6 people who are in charge of a nation, and the nation has lots of threats. That sounds like kind of a radical D&D campaign. Imagine how surprised the assassin's going to be when they find out that your level 6 diplomat is actually a 1 diplomat 5 rogue who assassinates them right back.
Oh. I think it does count as a sneak attack if you're sitting on the throne looking completely dulcet and then whatcha.
Yes. It is a totally lovely movie, and a lot of the people who watch our stuff are in parent ages, so if you got a little kid, it's going to be totally great. Your kid will ask you what hoodlally means, and you will have to tell them. But aside from that, it's very family friendly.
Yeah. Anyway, I guess thanks for watching or listening to our nonsense.
Oh, this is a podcast, so we should probably say the patron's name out loud, right?
Oh, yes. Well, first things first, we have some plugs to do. We have our Discord, server down in the description, or the closest they're on, wherever you're watching this.
You should definitely join that and
So,
make me feel happy. Because I do like, coming to it after a day or two of inactivity and seeing that there are 60, 70 messages makes me feel kind of like a king myself.
um, but yeah, other than that, we'd like to thank our lovely patrons, all of our Goblin Gang and Beholder buddies, obviously, and of the Lich Legion. We'd like to thank
You always get his name wrong, so I want you to say it really loud and clearly so we can all mock you.
Talaris.
Damn it. All right, well, that's fine then.
See, it sounds like Talarian Academy, but spelled slightly differently.
That's the official canon reason for that guy's name. And the other people's names are not allowed to say, or we'd technically be robbing $5 from Talaris. It's amazing the burdens that are on us now as content creators. We should end this podcast right here.